Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Two World Podcast. I'm getting us started off today, and I am Barney, and I'm joined with my two co-hosts. And the first one there is
Jacob.
And together with Jacob and I, we have.
Hi, I'm Ken.
All right, and summer is coming to a close, and so we're kind of getting our podcast shoes back on and getting back into a good rhythm. And we thought today we would start off with a very broad and interesting and varied subject dealing with music in a worship setting. And this was a topic that I'd wanted to talk about for a while, I guess just because the three of us, I believe, come from pretty different backgrounds. And music has such a way of sticking with you, no matter secular or classical or, worship music, just in its own way, throughout the day. I know for myself, I always have some tune going in my mind. And I think we probably also have a lot of memories associated with music in general. And I think when you get to the topic of music and worship, then probably the memories that you have associated with those are extra special. And I thought it'd be really neat to have a chance to talk this over with Ken and Jacob. And so we got a discussion document going and got some questions on the way. And we hope that you'll join us and find out what we're going to find out together about music and worship. So, was there any one question that either of you felt would be a good one to get us started off with?
I really enjoy, and I don't mean to jump ahead, Ken. I was just going to
Mhm.
mention the question on your sheet. What was music and worship like when you grew up? Because that would give a little bit of a background from
Mhm.
and context for where each of us are coming from.
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah, it
wondering,
seems like
yeah, Ken, if you,
sequentially, I'm very curious, as are our listeners, I'm sure, especially to hear from you two guys, because as I said before we joined the broadcast today, I have a little bit of an idea of Jacob's history with music growing up in the church. Barney, I'm really interested to hear yours.
Yeah. Well, I can start us off then. I still do, like I said at the beginning, I have a lot of memories connected with music. And especially, I remember when the sanctuary at Worcester Mennonite Church was switched around from where it is now. And, when it was time to sing hymns, then we would pull out the kind of bronze colored hymnal. And it was the Mennonite hymnal. And I'm curious, I don't know which came before it, but actually, Jacob, do you want to just talk a little bit just so that you can get it on the screen so that people can see what it looks like?
yes, here's the bronze Mennonite hymnal that Barney is talking about. I'm holding a copy up here for our YouTube viewers. And I'm just going to turn in the front to see when this was published. It was published in 1969 by Herald Press in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania. And this hymnal was used definitely before I came to Worcester Mennonite. And I'm wondering, Barney, when did they adopt the one after it pretty quickly? Or was there a little bit of a transition time before they went to the blue hymnal, a hymnal worship book, which was the successor, which was published in 92, and it was a joint project by Brethren Press, Faith and Light Press, and Mennonite Publishing House. That one is has been around for a lot of years. But do you remember when that transition happened? Was it in the 90s or?
Yeah, now that you mention it, I think that it must have been because I know that some of you can probably, if you're lucky, you can probably look in the the I guess the pews and the pew racks and find a handful of hymnals that I believe have the person's name in them who kind of dedicated them to the church or
Oh,
bought
wow.
them for the church,
Wow.
and written in a real nice calligraphy. And it was 1992 when when we started using them. And I remember that one reason, I guess, some people kind of say that the Mennonite anthem, like the official hymn, is 606, praise God from whom. But in the blue hymnal, it's 118. And so, we all know it as 606 from the bronze hymnal. And so everyone says, okay, well, maybe once or twice a year we would, close service with 606. Okay, let's sing 606. And no one needs the hymnal, but if you need it, it's 606. And so then we still everyone still kinds of knows it as well. I don't know how would it be now, but it was always so well known as 606. And then now it's and then in the blue hymnal it's 118. But, the bronze hymnal, our version at home, was so classic, I guess, that even the notes were written in shapes, squares and triangles. And yeah, I think that we must still have our copy at home. But one thing that really stands out to me that I really, really remember was that when we were deciding, when Worcester Mennonite was deciding to start using that hymnal book, the hymnal, the worship book, my mom got like this. I think she went to Loaves and Fishes, the Christian bookstore in Worcester, Ohio, and I think she got maybe a 2 cassette or 3 cassette set of a majority of the hymns that were in that book. And I remember, because I would have been like 13, so I remember saying, in a 13-year-old kind of way, why'd you bother getting that, and she said, she wanted to become familiar with the hymns because a number of them were new, and so we would pop those cassettes into the tape player in the minivan and and become familiar with the new songs. But when and I think that at our service we didn't introduce so many new songs so quickly, but throughout the years then I realized how kind of innovative that hymnal worship book was in 1992, because there's a number of hymns from Africa. I think there's some hymns from even Japan and Korea and whatnot. And so when I think about it, I thought, wow, that's very ecumenical, very amazing that they were really conscious of the Mennonite church's identity at that time as being very worldwide, and also having a number of members who aren't in North America. And so I thought that was really, really special.
Hmm. Barney, I love your reference to 606. I grew up Lutheran, and I can remember now, you've spurred this memory. As a kid, around Christmas time, we had the big red hymnal. That one lasted, I think, into the 70s, and then a green one. I can remember during Advent, I would always look ahead because hymn number 15 was Joy to the World, and that was the first Christmas one in the hymnal. And I just kept thinking, you know, I I don't mind O Come Emmanuel, but the rest of these really aren't catching my attention very well. So maybe like the fourth Sunday in Advent, Joy to the World would make the bulletin, and I'd be thinking, here we go. You know, here we go. We've got 2 or 3 weeks where we'll be into number 15 and beyond, and, happy times with those hymns, because just the classics, Away in the Manger and all the rest.
It's really interesting hearing you both share about growing up with hymnals. The church that I grew up in didn't use a hymnal. We projected our music onto a screen. At first, they had slide transparencies. I don't know how many of our listeners will remember that technology, but it was a clear plastic sheet with that had font printed onto it, and then you put it on this projector, and it would do look like just a black and white image. And now they use digital technology like projectors and like almost like PowerPoint slides for the lyrics of the songs. But anyway, the music that we sang by and large was contemporary music, and the church that I was in was called the Vineyard Church, and they had a whole body of music that had been written by people connected with that movement. So there's a whole Vineyard music catalog of songs. And so we sang a lot of those when I was growing up. These in the early 80s when I was young, they had more of a folk quality. And then as the music kind of developed, it almost had more like rock, alternative rock, some pop elements, but still trying to retain its like worshipful focus, but in that form. But we did sing hymns though, at least once a year for our Christmas Eve service. And so the hymns that I knew growing up were primarily Christmas hymns. And we, interestingly had this tradition of, and on Christmas Eve, lighting candles and singing Silent Night, which interestingly, as I've years later connected with Worcester Mennonite Church, the same tradition was present. And I don't know how many churches do this, but I love that the multiple churches are, singing the same songs and even celebrating sometimes with candles in that way. But my mom had grown up in for part of our journey in like a Methodist context, and so she knew some classic Christian hymns and would play them on the piano. So I would hear them from time to time. And she and my dad were a part of a ministry to a nursing home. And a lot of the songs that the residents in that nursing home were familiar with and that they wanted to sing were hymns. And so when I would go with them on a Sunday afternoon to help with that, I would be exposed to hymns there. But it was really kind of later in life when connected with Worcester Mennonite, and a little bit before that when I served for a while as a youth pastor in a few Methodist churches, that I learned to use a hymnal and seeing the notes and learning about harmonies, especially in the Mennonite context, the harmonies. And so that's been a real journey, and it's very interesting. And I'll just say one final thing before I hand it back to you guys. Just learning the difference between maybe in the contemporary music model, the sense of an experience, a repetition of words, getting into a place emotionally of sensing intimacy with God, versus maybe sometimes in the hymnal context, more of a sense of instruction. Like we're learning as we go through the verses, we're affirming, we're confessing certain things about who God is, but also richly imbued into those lines are a lot of theology and references to scripture. And so maybe engaging another part of our brain or another part of ourself to in learning as we worship. So just kind of just learning to value both aspects. And I know that's a generalization. You can have strong feelings of intimacy while singing a hymn, just as you can be instructed in contemporary worship. But anyway, those were some of my general impressions. So yeah, kind of turn it back to you guys and say, oh, maybe I could ask this question: had either of you had exposure to contemporary Christian music in your formation when you were growing up, or how did you encounter that?
Yeah, I remember, like, for the longest time when we would visit my dad's parents in Indiana, then we would go to their church, which was Benton Mennonite Church. And I think all of my dad's oldest brother was there, and maybe his sister too. And so of course they would go to that same church. And then my dad's brother started going to a different church. And then so, they said, well, just come, why don't you guys just come with us? Because I think maybe at that time, maybe my grandparents weren't able to make it to church at that time, or they were having it at the retirement area where they were living. So we went there, and then there's this there's this band up front, and I thought, whoa, what is this? And they've got a guitar, two guitars maybe, and drums, and I thought, this is really new. But it was catchy, but it just wasn't what I was used to. And I think because of that, it was a really big church with lots of people, and in that way it was nice being, experiencing everyone else for whom this was not new, and really enjoying the music. And then I could kind of like have an outsider, in an observing role there, just seeing, oh, what's this about? Let's kind of take this in a little bit. I did have the, when I was little, I always remember we'd open turn hymn number, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd say, "Oh, yes, it only has 3 verses, this will be done real fast," or, "Oh, man, this has 5. Whoa, how did we end up with a 5-verser today?" You know, and then but then now at this church, I was like, "When is this song going to be done? Why are we singing the same words over and over again? Can't this end? Come on." You know? And so it was very, very new for me, but I did think because when you saw the guitar and the drums and everything, what kind of music is this? But I thought, "Wow, this is amazing." They can make worshipful music with these instruments, that I remember as my first exposure to, kind of worship songs in that way.
Mm. Well, as I was growing up in the Lutheran church, and it was true right straight through the church, on campus and in Medina, Ohio, before, I moved to Worcester and became part of the Mennonite church, always an organ, that there was always an organ and sometimes a piano. But what's coming to mind is toward the end of high school, I'm talking, I was a guy who was in high school in 1970, 71, 72. Really, the Jesus movement took hold big time. You know, Jesus Christ Superstar on Broadway, and I remember teaching Sunday school to 4th graders as a high school student and just playing some bits and pieces of that to see how they would react. And still, there was no real contemporary worship within that Lutheran church. However, there were Jesus freak gatherings around the community around Youngstown, Ohio, where meeting in a barn and to me it was really interesting to sit back and look at worship that way because I'd never seen anything like it. My parents rather conservative. I enjoyed going to church, no doubt about it, and singing the songs. And I'll make a note here, kind of a tiny segue. It's the only time I would ever hear my mother sing, ever. And so I treasured that because she was not one to sing around the house. Dad would. But anyhow, moving then out of high school, having experienced these things and attending a Lutheran church on campus where I was an undergraduate, I remember one Sunday thinking, I've really got to try something different. Other than weddings, I've never gone to anything but a Lutheran church. So I went to another part of campus and went to a room, and everybody's sitting on the floor like in a circle, and people are smoking cigarettes. And I'm just sitting here watching this thinking, how is this going to go? And it kind of felt all right from the sense that the focus was still there on the way I could see myself being part of a service, but yet the comfort level wasn't there. And so I thought, well, interesting, but we'll move on from that. The church I attended on campus had a contemporary service, but for some reason, and it could be as simple as I'd rather go in the morning and get it finished, not only because the rest of the day, but evenings were spent a lot of times walking to the library to get studying done. And that's when the contemporary services were. None of us had cars, on campus, and that made it a little bit tougher. And in retrospect, I really wish I'd given that a shot just to see, just to see.
Do I really like hearing how we kind of had a crisscross of
Mhm.
experiences in the sense of me going from contemporary to, like, a traditional hymns and you being formed in traditional hymns going to contemporary. There are other musical styles beyond these 2 that we could talk about, and one that I have really been wondering about is, do you remember I think it was in the '90s, there was a moment where this album came out called Chant, and it was the Benedictine monks of Santo Domingo de Silos. In 1994, it came out. It was a really popular album, and it was just Gregorian chant. I don't know if you had heard of that at the time, but a lot of people I knew had this album, and I was like, it was just a very different musical style, and yet a whole other tradition within Christian worship. And so I'm kind of wondering, did you hear any of that music back then, and did it make any impression on you? It was interesting for me, and it was definitely one over the years I've gone back to, not only Gregorian chant, but different types of chant. There's a Byzantine type of chant that we hear in Eastern Christian churches, like Eastern Orthodox. Then there's other Catholic orders other than Benedictines that have their own type of chant. I just wonder, have you heard any Christian chant music before, and what was that like?
I've heard I remember the monks thing, Jacob, but do I remember distinctly what it sounded like and did I listen? Probably gave it a slight attempt and then moved away. Barney, do you recall this in the 90s? And
Yeah, yep, and
okay.
it was right up my alley.
Oh, wow.
I really, really liked it, and I have a few of the albums still, and yeah, and I even have, like, some that I think that they, edited. I think they edited the music. I don't think the monks were necessarily outside, but they edited so that there was chanting with kind of sounds of nature, and then just, just the normal chanting with, like, that it sounds like they're in, a large space, and yeah, that I don't not I can't say exactly what it is because it's not like I'm listening to the lyrics, but I really still do enjoy that style of worship music and worship, music for worship.
Is it was it the tone of their voices that
Yeah, I think it must be. I think it must be the way that everything kind of comes together and just, there's no it makes music in itself. It sounds like it's beyond singing, because it sounds like you can actually sense music being played along with the chanting, even though it's just chanting. And I just really thought that was just so really fantastic. Really liked it.
In some ways, if I may, just kind of follow up, like you said, the phrase there sounds like it's even beyond singing. We've talked a little bit about, or at least I had mentioned in my part so far, that like I had this sense in contemporary worship of seeking after intimacy with God, in a closeness. I feel like and if we talked about hymns as like this kind of instructive part of it is instruction, I feel like chant is kind of about transcendence, like God above and beyond, like ethereal, like the sense of wonder and awe in God's presence. And so I feel like different forms of music can highlight different aspects of the Christian experience. And so when I would listen to chant, there were these ethereal melodies that kind of were simplistic but also unpredictable for our like typical modern listener's ear, Western listener's ear. But then there are these moments of pausing and silence. And even though they're chanting in Latin, the quality of the voice. And I think a lot of times that there weren't, it was like a plain chant. I don't know that there were lots of harmonies. So there was a lot of singing the melody together. It just was a very fascinating and almost otherworldly form of music. And I just wanted to mention, I was just looking on the Wikipedia page for that album, and it says that it peaked at number 3 on the Billboard 200 music charts, if you could believe that, back in '94 when it was marketed and came out. So, I mean, to get to number 3 with this kind of unique Christian music, it just kind of fascinating to me. There must have been some kind of interest or hunger for that experience, even among people who wouldn't consider themselves religious for it to get that high. So anyway,
yeah.
just a little side note. Are there other styles of music that we haven't mentioned yet that you would like to talk about that you've like I think you said, Barney, that you've noticed in some hymnals they really have a global music kind of sensibility to them, where there are other forms of music included, hymns from Africa or Asia or Latin America or South America. Like, did any of those types of songs interest you when you first heard them? Or
Yeah, I think you'll have to. I think maybe if I describe what I'm trying to say, you'll know what I mean. Like, I know that we have a collection, maybe 3 or 4 hymns that are together in the worship book that are French.
Mhm.
And what is the style that it is from? The t
Taizé, Taizé,
teze.
yes,
Yes.
yes. I
Yeah,
meant and a
yeah.
very simplistic.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah,
simple
yeah.
verses and refrains from
Mm,
like a monastic community in, say,
mm,
France. But
mhm,
the community, I think, is ecumenical. So there are members from different Christian traditions there, but people come from around the world on pilgrimage to this site, and the music is thought to be very quick to learn and to participate in, but also very meditative. Almost, it has some common DNA, I feel, with like the monastic feel of singing to some sense, and to some degree. But it's also accessible, like a contemporary worship song in some way. Like the chorus and the refrain are really easy to memorize, and so yes, you're right. Teze,
mhm, 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 yeah.
wonderful.
That was very unique, and then I remember when I was getting ready to leave for my one-year term with MCC, with Mennonite Central Committee, that was the first time that I heard some of the African songs that are in the hymnal, and it's so nice how they have them in both languages, in English and then in whichever language it is that it's taken from. And the people around me who were there, they knew them so well, and it was my first time to hear them, and I really picked up on them, really appreciated them a lot, and I remember them even still, so it's really nice that to have that kind of exposure, It's that's one thing that's neat about sharing this common hymnal amongst a majority of the other Mennonite churches is each church, for the most part, engages it in a different way, and then when you come together with people who are still Mennonite, but from different churches, you get exposed to different hymns that you might not have normally in your own context.
And Barney, what that reminds me of, at the Lutheran church I attended in Medina, Ohio, for a couple of years, we hosted the Martin Luther King celebratory service, and we had no people of color attending our church normally. So it was neat to have not only people of color, but we're not conducting and writing the whole service. And so there, for me at least, was a bit of exposure to another way to worship, the way these hymns sound, which I didn't get a lot there. Now, where Jacob is our pastor, really, culturally and experiential, it has been fabulous to in English and in Swahili and in, with multi-church gatherings. This has been fabulous, I know, for people like me. And I think as you look around at faces during those services, that it's a nice experience to stretch a bit what you consider to be conducting a service for you.
And just to piggyback on what Ken is saying there, we've had some really unique opportunities because of a local Swahili speaking congregation in Akron that's Mennonite, and then a local Spanish speaking congregation, Salem Community Church, that has Mennonite roots. And so we come together 3 or 4 times a year for common worship. And the elements of the service are that a blend of English, Swahili, and Spanish. And so it's a wonderful way with music to experience different cultures all coming around the common purpose of glorifying God and giving thanks to God. It's a really unique experience. And then I also want to piggyback and say, through our sister church relationship with the Actio Bible Baptist Church, which our listeners, who, if they've been following us for a while, have heard us talk about, and they know that, Barney, you've helped cultivate that relationship. But in our new Mennonite hymnal, this Voices Together, it's purple. I'm kind of holding it up here right now. And I want to say that it came out within the past, I want to say maybe 4 or 5 years, I think. Just going to check here. Oh, published in 2020. So yeah, 5 years. But anyway, there are a lot of international hymns here. And one of the songs is in Japanese, May the Peace of Christ be with you. We shared that song with our sister church, and it was a lovely experience to sing to them and to try to sing the Japanese part and send them a video, and then and the English part too, and then in return for them to sing the Japanese and English part and send it back to us. Just that feeling of worshiping together in our respective places, and then but sending that to the other, and while we're thinking of them, and the way of music as building a bridge, connecting people. across cultures, well, in the same congregation, but then in this case, across cultures and across distance. It's a really powerful thing. And so I'm glad that that song was in our hymnal. When you heard that hymn, Barney, did it leave an impression on you? The style felt like a little bit different than a typical English hymn. I don't know if the melody had any qualities that resonate with Japanese music or not. Do you remember that melody on that one? I know that we do have one hymn in one of our Mennonite hymnals that is based on the traditional song. I think it's Sakura,
Mhm.
and that's definitely a Japanese melody, but I don't know if you felt that for this one song I just mentioned, "May the peace of Christ be with you."
Yeah, I'm curious when it was written because I know that since it's a Baptist church here at the Yacho Bible Baptist Church, that I think that essentially they use hymns that were translated into Japanese. And so we have a lot of, hymns written by Fanny Crosby and whatnot. They're very familiar to me when I sing them. But then there are some that are written by a few, like if when I speak with other church members, they say, "Oh, the person who wrote this one, he was really, a stalwart, in the church. He was, a very, key member of the early church." And they wrote their own hymns or the words to their own hymns, and I'm not sure if the music was maybe sometimes the music was adapted from other familiar tunes, and maybe sometimes it was music that kind of they built off of the way that they're familiar with hymns sounding. So in that way, the hymn from the Voices Together was different for us in a way, but also very worshipful for sure.
That's interesting, Barney. What kind of sense do you get as you're sitting there with the other parishioners? I mean, you obviously know these people, and how do you get a sense of their openness to this, their appreciation, their love of music, or appreciation of a different melodic structure? How does that feel in Japan?
Yeah, the neat thing at the Yachiyo Church is that a lot of people are trained. I think that for the most part, now that I think about it, in Japan, pretty much when you enter junior high school, you're essentially expected to have some kind of extracurricular activity, and music is very, very common, whether it be, piano or clarinet or, violin or something. And so I think that probably everyone in the church is can readily read music, and the person who the worship leader then also, is the hymn leader as well. And so it's really important that they do a good job of helping Mari Sensei, who plays the piano, to get the right timing timing down, right rhythm. And yeah, I think that when you hear, if you ever have the chance to tune into one of the services or, maybe watch it later, you'll always hear the pastor, Shiraishi Sensei's voice loud and clear. And for the longest time, my memory I had was how his second daughter, Anzu, she would sing almost equally as loud as her father. And then we have Mr. Ikea, who would every once in a while get a little chorus, a little choir put together, and we do a little hymn maybe around Christmas time or Easter around then. And we practice after church and perform it just for each other. And so it's really neat that everyone is really committed to the songs and worship in that way. But I think that everyone is very, very familiar with. I don't think that I wonder if they've ever had a different hymnal or if it's been the same hymnal for all these, I guess we're up to 70 years or so of the Baptist church in Japan. So it's possible that it's been that hymnal just, new edition, just reprints of it all this time. I wonder. I'll have to ask about that.
Mm. Well, should we engage another question, or Jacob, do you have a thought here on?
Yeah, I love how our journey went from our own experiences to this kind of global reality of music,
Yeah.
and from the very personal to the very broad sense of almost universal sense of music. So maybe we could bring it back in to focus again on maybe more on a personal level and ask about like go-to songs if there's certain ones that, or maybe even if you found a number of songs that you've liked over the years, have you ever found some are by the same, writer or composer? It could be that angle too. Is there, or just individual songs that are like heart songs, or they have a special meaning or impact on your own spiritual journey? Maybe we could reflect on a few of those. We mentioned this one, "May the peace of Christ be with you." That's a lovely, lovely song. But are there some that you would like to mention?
Do you want to start us off?
Sure. I'd mentioned before that having grown up in the vineyard, some of the songs in the '80s had almost like a folk quality, and then it kind of moved more into like a rock genre. And there was a certain composer, the songwriter that I really liked in the vineyard named Brian Dirksen, and 3 of his songs have become like lifelong heart songs for me that I go back to again and again in different seasons. And I like to play them on guitar. I like to listen to them. I like to sing them in church. And interestingly enough, and I'll mention the names of the songs in just a minute, but interestingly enough, on a few occasions we've sung some of those songs here in the Mennonite context at Worcester Mennonite, because some of them have made their way into our hymnals, believe it or not, in the newer versions. So talking about, like we were earlier, music being a bridge between people, like good music isn't just meant to be contained in one community. It's meant to be shared. And so Christians all across traditions share their music with each other. So the vineyard music has made its way here. And so for me, it's so special. Those songs are so special on their own. But then now, even to share them with some of my brothers and sisters here at Worcester Mennonite, it's tremendous. And I remember it at my ordination, we sang the song Faithful One, which was one of Brian Dirksen's songs. And it meant so much to me because it was like a coming together of my life in a lot of ways. My ordination service was not long after my mom had passed away, and my dad had preceded her by a couple years, and so that experience was very of losing them was very displacing and disorienting. And that song, "Faithful One," has a line in it, "All through the storm, your love is the anchor." And it's like this radical statement of trust in God, even when you feel disoriented or displaced in life. And to sing that at Worcester Mennonite, this song from my youth, in the absence of my parents who would have been at that event, but couldn't be because they had gone on, to sing those words meant so much to me. It was so powerful. And I'll always carry that experience with me, to sing that with my community now who were surrounding me like family, and to affirm the truth that yes, all through the storms of life, God is our anchor. And it's so powerful. So that song, Faithful One, is one of his. And then there was a song that he did, Refiner's Fire, that I've loved singing over the years. It's a really powerful image of God, how God changes us and how relationship with God is transformative. And then there's another song we used to sing in the vineyard called Arms of Love, which is definitely about intimacy with God, this sense of closeness or connection. Like God holds us in his arms, almost like a parent holds a young child or holds a baby in their arms, and how we enter into worship in that posture sometimes, and before God is like he's holding us in his arms of love. And so one of our current worship leaders, Maria Zaire, sang that song not too long ago in one of our worship services, and I wasn't expecting it. I hadn't really looked closely at the order of worship for that Sunday, but when we came to it, it's just this beautiful connection of where I was in the past and where I am now, the meaning of this song. Yeah, so those are some of my favorites. How about for you guys?
Well, I can start with, and I can't remember, Jacob, if we've used it in the Mennonite Church, possibly, don't remember, but a hymn from the Lutheran hymnal called "I Was There to Hear Your Morning Cry." All of us have kids, and all of us were there to hear their morning cry. It is a hymn that lyrically is so spot on and creates such emotion. I don't think I've ever sung it without having to stop.
Mm.
And I mean, it's just so beautiful, and it takes you right through life. You know, I'll be there at the end, whatever that means. So particularly moving, and maybe I'm drawn to that sort of song, because another one that came to mind, much more contemporary, is a song called "Blessings" by Laura Story. A person where I was working at the time for a park district said, here's one you should listen to because the story behind it, ironically, her last name is Story, is such that, she wrote it during a really trying time in their lives where her husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor. This is a young couple. And I remember I was driving from work to another place that I had to go to for work at that time. And I accessed that song because I think she provided a CD for me. And I remember just pulling over because this woman, Laura, captured those moments, not only the sadness and the possible, ultimately horrible end, but the hope she pressed into the lyrics was just astounding. And that one's always on a playlist for me. And I guess one other one that came to mind was "Well Done, Faithful Servant." It was played at my dad's funeral, and it was uplifting because he was a faithful servant. He committed himself to a life of serving God, serving Christ in World War II when, he was on a ship that was torpedoed and he was in the water on Christmas Eve. And he, as so often the case, on battlefields, you make those promises to serve God faithfully in your life, but he stuck to it, and he really was a good example that way. Barney?
Yeah, I think that one one hymn that I really kind of felt connected to when I was starting my life here in Japan. I I didn't have a TV, and I didn't have, there was no YouTube. There was nothing really to do on the computer so much to keep my attention, and so I had my blue hymnal with me, and then, throughout the evening, pastime, I would sing hymns. And there's one hymn that we would only ever sing at Easter. And so you would only ever get to hear it once a year. And it was, lift your glad voices in triumph on high, for Jesus hath risen and we shall not die. And I just really, really liked that. And I found that I didn't even have a bicycle at that time. So when I'm walking, around to go shopping and whatnot, that would all a hymn would always be with me. And it's kind of like my background music, kind of the hymn that stuck with me throughout the day. And I thought, now's my chance to, engage this hymn, more than just once a year. But one other, and then I guess, like, kind of categories or types of hymns, or, writers of hymns. I've always really, a lot of Fanny Crosby hymns are so catchy. But I noticed that, whenever, again, kind of a quirky thing I did when I was little, I would always check, the tune, that the hymn is taken from. And strangely, I found myself really drawn to hymns that are, like folk, traditional British, folk tune or something like that, traditional Irish, melody, and I really do like those, like "Be Thou My Vision" is one of those and whatnot. And I remember in my humanities class in high school how my one teacher think he was United Methodist, and he said, the "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God," he said, that tune used to be a German drinking song, and, the people in church thought, "We've gotta stop this," so then they just put, wholesome words to it, because he even said in class, he said, "A mighty fortress is our God, let's drink." So, so they choose, but then in the past year, actually, a year to this very, very day, one of my favorite hockey players, he suddenly passed away. He was he and his brother were hit while they were riding bicycles, and it was hard for me to process this, him just being in his 30s and whatnot, and, so much excitement for the season getting ready to start, and, his best friend joined the team and whatnot, and then I was just kind of trying to get, as much news about what happened as I could, and I even tuned into the funeral. So he was Catholic, Johnny Goudreau, and at the end of the service, they sang. I guess the person who, I guess in that context, just one person sings, and so the person who sang, trying to blank. It was just in my mind. Yeah. You who dwell in the shelter of the Lord, who abide in God's shadow for life. And I was slightly familiar with that hymn, and I realized I even had a CD with it on that my dad gave me, and I was really, really drawn to that, and it stuck with me for days and days and days, and so much so that I had to memorize the words, and so I could sing all of the verses because it's a little irregular, and I kind of like that. And my kids picked up on it because I was singing it so much, and we sing it even still, and my youngest son often asks me to sing it. And I looked up the story behind the hymn because the person who wrote it I think he was a priest, and he's since passed away, but he had written a number of hymns, and he came up with this hymn when his friend's father passed away, and he wrote it quickly as a means of comfort for his friend. And a lot of it is taken from, I think it's Psalm 90. And that's another thing that I really like about songs of worship, that when they're taken from scripture. So like another one that I have is that I really appreciate is from Jeremiah. And I'm drawing a blank again here, but it's obey my voice, and I will be your God, and ye shall be my people. And that's also in the Blue Hymnal. And I these are hymns. I think that in a way they kind of fill in the background of my life. They're often with me throughout the day. From when I wake up, and then you know, just kind of keeping me company that was especially the case when I didn't have anything to distract me in my early years here in Japan, and it's so neat that my kids are really drawn to at least one of them that I appreciate so well.
Sure. I'm thrilled you brought up A Mighty Fortress, Barney, because as a Lutheran, written by our hero, Marty, Martin Luther. For one thing, I remember as a kid singing it, and it was, you felt like getting up and stomping your feet. It was just that's that kind of hymn. And I also learned a new word, bulwark, which was such a funny sounding word. What on earth is a bulwark? So great stories, Barney. I want to throw out one more because I loved it forever and ever and ever, and yay for the fact that it's also in the Mennonite hymnal, and that's I love to tell the story.
Hmm.
It seemed like as I was reflecting here, I was telling such not negative or funereal choices, but I love to tell the story is always just I don't know, there's such a joy
Mm.
in that
Mhm.
one, even as a kid.
I like how in your answers, there were some elements of how the music takes us beyond church into ordinary life. Like, I think, Barney, you were saying when you were shopping, when you're walking around shopping, you heard the melody, or your kids could hear you humming or singing a melody, and they could become familiar with it. And so could we talk a little bit about how we engage with music outside of Sundays? What are the vehicles that bring it to us, or how do we think about it, or how does it enter our lives outside of a Sunday morning worship service? Maybe while you're thinking, I'll just mention for me, like, playing guitar and finding time here or there to play some of the worship songs on guitar has been a meaningful journey for me over the years. And so I still at times will get out the new hymnal, Voices Together, or we actually have these other books in our pews, Sing the Story and Sing the Journey. And the nice thing is some of these resources have certain songs with the guitar chords above them. So even if I can't musically discern the song just through the notes, like, and figure it out that way for guitar, I can play the chords and I know the melody and I can sing it. And so anyway, that's one way that I engage with the music, not on a Sunday, but just in my own personal worship. Or sometimes Katie will join me, she'll play piano and I'll play guitar or bass, or and we can play some of these songs together, which is lovely. But how about for you guys? What are some ways that you like to engage with the music outside of Sundays?
Yeah, my alarm that I wake up to is "Be Thou My Vision." My parents gave me a CD that was done by the Eastern Mennonite Choir, the Eastern Mennonite sing chamber singers, I think, and it was a number of hymns from the hymnal worship book, and that one is since it's one of my favorites, and since it's so peaceful, then it's easy for me to wake up with, and then that often kind of helps me start the day and stays with me, and then of course there's another one that I often in that same theme of waking up is, I owe the Lord a morning song. I owe the Lord a morning song of gratitude and praise. It even talks about, for the kind mercies he has shown in lengthening out my days. And it's just, yeah, it's a new day and to be thankful for that. But otherwise, yeah, I pretty much, it's a kind of a personal thing where I just kind of keep the songs or the Oh, I guess one way that I never really connected this until just now is my dad was such a big fan of Michael W. Smith, and so he would often play those records, the LPs, you know, in the house while we were growing up, and me too. Now that I have some of his CDs, or you can hear his music on YouTube, and then I like to have that as background music, when I'm doing my work or working around the house. So that's one way that I like to kind of keep that present in in my life, during the week.
I will find because of, the great array of musicians and worship music leaders that we have in our church, and the introduction of songs I've never heard because admittedly, I'm not a great follower of contemporary Christian artists. I kinda grew up in a DC talk kind of time, and I'm aware of Michael W. Smith and Chris Tomlin and some of the others because I will see their names as writers of some of the songs projected on the wall. But a lot of times I'll find myself inadvertently driving around a day or 2 later, recalling, humming lyrically if it was repetitive enough to remember one of the songs from the Sunday service. Other than that, for me, it's a lot of still 50 years later, a guy I got to know a little bit growing up, and my all-time guitar hero, and his name is Phil Keaggy. It just still resonates. I still look at this man as a hero in my life, maybe for no other reason that he was a couple of years older than me when I was in high school, and just watching his life unfold where he could have been multimillionaire because of his abilities as a guitarist alone and a beautiful voice and the ability to write. And he eschewed all of that to be a Christian artist. And still, I follow him online, and he's not touring a lot anymore, but we can watch him in his little home studio, and the people he brings in there to just share snippets of music that they're playing around with at that time. And Jacob, you'd enjoy watching this, I know, because of the equipment that's there and playback and everything. His music is still so very, very vital for me.
I've heard some of Phil Keaggy's music where he's using a looping device, and he'll lay down part of a bass foundation for a song with, like, some rhythm elements or something on a guitar, and then he'll add another layer, and another layer, and another layer until it sounds like you have, like, a whole band playing, but it's all just little bits and parts that he's generated, and then he'll when you use the looping device, you can stop and do other things, and it's just a wonderful multifaceted way of, like, hearing music, one musician, but really he's been able to magnify his talent, so it's like a collection of the same musician on different, you know, tracks and different angles, and so, yeah,
Yeah,
he's amazing.
he was the first I'd ever seen because you know, he would go out and tour by himself, but yet wanted to provide the fullness of, as you said, seemingly a band behind him. He's the first I'd ever seen to use a looping device, and he was also the first I had ever seen where he would really use his pinky to play with the volume control on his Gibson Les Paul to create almost violinish type wails, in the midst of playing a lead. And I've heard other musicians, try that as well. But yeah, he was always playing around doing some things. When he was with a group called Glass Harp, this is now early 1970s. I There were only 3 of them, and I used to watch him as he would launch into a seemingly never-ending lead of, "I wonder where this is going." I always felt kinda bad for the bass player and the drummer. I know they were looking at him, trying to figure out when, when the rhythm change would occur to move into the rest of the song. But boy, what a pleasure I'm so blessed that I got to see him so many times, and still even once in Worcester, Ohio, within the last 10 years. So, and I remember sitting with him after the show a little bit and reminiscing because we lived fairly close together, and he's so, I still wonder about if I should have gone to college, and I said, "Phil, if I had 1/8 of what you have, there would have been no doubt the pathway I would have taken." But he still exhibits that humility that's so endearing,
Mm.
and the way he would talk about his relationship with Christ was, I could go on and on. Thanks. I'm curious, guys, about you are far more accomplished musician-wise than I am, clearly in the field of music. Have you guys written lyrics? Have you written liturgy? Have you written that sort of thing? Done that sort of thing?
When I was in college, I was in a Christian band called Drenched, and we tried to express, themes of faith and couple them with what we were going through as college students on a secular campus, that could be quite critical and uncertain about things of faith that we were talking about, and so we tried to be sensitive to our audience and, like, present things in a way that was accessible, but one song that I wrote during that time is called "I Believe," and it's very much a worship song, but it was trying to name in the verses about the struggles that we can go through in life when we doubt or when we're not feeling close to God or we're not feeling spiritual, and that longing for, like, a breakthrough or transcendence beyond that experience or emotion where we do feel closest with God or we do feel purpose in what we're doing. And so the chorus is very much an affirmation. I believe in you, and the affirmation is meant to be kind of like an arrow prayer, like they talk about in monastic Christian spirituality, when you feel like you're in a fog or a haze and you don't know your way out, and it's like you take an arrow and you shoot it upward. Your prayer tries to shoot up through the fog outside of it, till it reaches out to God. And obviously, God doesn't need us to shoot a prayer to Him; He can hear us wherever we are. But it's more of a metaphor for, like, sometimes we feel like we're in the fog. We need a way to penetrate it and get out of it and transcend it. And that song has a kind of bridge, or maybe it kind of concludes with a musically in a way that tries to ascend, and the rhythm and the melody for that part, it goes bum 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 bum, and each note is going upward trying to ascend. And that listeners of our podcast might recognize that as that's the melody we play every week as the intro and the outro to our podcast. Is that music is in the background, and it's from that song that I wrote in college, I believe. And so for me, that music has always been about transcendence and ascending and going upward and out of this, like looking upward as you come out of the struggle towards with hope towards God. And so it's meant to be like a subtle background to all of our discussions and all of our thinking and questioning and reflecting, is ideally the sense of hope that in life we're on a journey upward towards God. Even as Richard Rohr says, sometimes it can feel like we're falling upward, like maybe we're not always like perfectly in step and like making it gracefully with all of our movements, but we're still trying to head that way. But anyway, that's that's the song that comes to mind for me that I've tried to write in my life that is most that type of worship song piece, or that type of express that type of heart. So, how about for you, Barney?
I'm still a little bit curious about
Oh yeah,
the song that you mentioned. Do you kind of remember how, like, the lyrics came about to you, or the
yeah,
order was? Did the
sure.
music come first, or the lyrics, or together, or?
I was working on the music and the lyrics simultaneously. I was going through a period of struggle in my kind of academic life. I had a lot of really hard classes my sophomore year. I had a really hard economics course and a hard, difficult math course at this one semester, which was kind of shaking my confidence a little bit. And I felt discouraged by that. And then I also felt discouraged too, because I'm going to answer your question. I'm just giving you a little context to explain how the lyrics emerged. I, I had been very much in a bubble growing up in terms of, like, I was surrounded in a lot of ways by a faith community, and a lot of the environments that I went in through, like, middle school and high school, were Christian environments. And so coming to College of Worcester, where critical thinking is such a valued and important part of the experience, in that whole process, you're exposed to lots of questions about your faith and scrutiny and different aspects that, try to stretch and challenge and, have you reflect on that. And so I was going through a season where I was struggling. And so I was trying to express that in the verses. Secret seasons that I'm sliding through, times of opaqueness that keep me from you. Your love is certain, your love is true. You're the Redeemer, and I trust in you. It was the first verse, and it was trying to name, like, this season I'm in, this struggle, this sense of, I use the word opaqueness, but there's probably a better way to say it, like a sense of where faith and spirituality seems not confusing, but it seems like inaccessible and distant and hard to get at. And the chorus is and I yet I believe in you, and I believe in you. I know it's true. I believe in you. And it's meant to say, like, I don't feel it. I'm struggling, but I have this hope, and it like I want it kind of like the psalmist, in some of the psalms in the midst of struggle, the psalmist is complaining and like struggling, and then they get to a moment where they say, "But yet, Lord, you are in heaven," or "Yet, Lord, you see my struggle," or I trust in you for salvation," or whatever the phrase may be, and it's this sense of seeking that transcendent moment of saying, "Yet, despite all the struggle, I still have hope," and I affirm. So that's what I was trying to say with the chorus. So I was writing that, but I think that the melody came first to finally answer your question. I had this kind of minor melody. It starts out with a C sharp minor chord, and the chord itself has this suspended element, and going from a suspended element to just the regular C sharp minor had this kind of melodic, kind of melancholic quality of like sliding and sinking. And I was trying to get at the idea of like going down. We sometimes in the Psalms you hear about like the psalmist feels like they're sinking, you know, and then being lifted up in the chorus, and then ultimately I don't know if you call it a bridge or the final part of the song with the melody I mentioned, where it is that feeling of transcendence where you're going upward and upward and upward. So yeah. So the music kind of came first, but it was all steeped in the struggle I was in my sophomore year, and I'm trying to name that, and then yet have some hope and affirm some hope in God in the midst of that. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, and were you was the band Drenched already formed, or was this and
Yes,
then did you introduce it to them, or was this one that you
I
kind of
did.
kept how
Yes,
did they
they liked it. Our drummer, Brian Seitz, especially liked it. I think that song really resonated with him, and the chorus, I think, really resonated with him. I think my other bandmates liked it too, and yeah, we learned it pretty quickly. The the chorus is very the chords are very easy for the chorus, but the first part has a little bit of a riff for guitar that's a little bit harder. But yeah, they enjoyed it. Generally speaking, like we would all share music with each other and would bring things to practices. And so in that particular season, I think I was kind of on a little bit of a writing streak because they say art or music or whatever the things are that you're creating often flow out of your experience. And if you have something to say because you're really working through something, it kind of flows sometimes into what you're making. And so I think because I was struggling so much, I was contributing more songs in that season than usual. So they were teasing me a little bit. They're like, "Jake, you have another new one?" Yeah, I come to practice, I got have another new one, guys. They're like, "You have another?" But when I shared this with them, they liked it. Yeah, and I hope one day, and Barney, you've been very patient, and Ken, I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but I hope one day to do an episode about this band Drenched, because I have like a lot of clips and images and stories, and I would love to explore that with you guys. But it's one of those things I want to get it right. I want to prepare it so that it feels like it. But I don't want it to be the type of thing where you're chasing a perfect thing that you never do. So I got to get to the point where I let it be, good enough and like go for it. So, but thanks for listening as I went on and on there.
Sure. I think it's impressive that you were a young musician and doing a very accomplished thing, aside from not only the other things you have to do as an undergraduate student, but use the word opaqueness and kind of eschewed a little bit. I think that's probably accurate, but let's get the fog to lift here, if I'm interpreting some of
Hmm.
your lyrics
Yeah.
correctly, and you were able to accomplish all that. Kudos to you. That's and one further thing, we do you still find occasion to play it and maybe would bring it into our little church house?
Oh, that would be fun. Thanks for asking. Yeah,
It would be great fun.
I had a chance to play that song at the Spoon restaurant with Jeremy Clevenger and Tom Lugalubi, because Jeremy, he's like a local artist and finds lots of opportunities to play. And then I think when we were getting ready for that show, he's like, "What other things could we do, guys? Do you have any suggestions?" And I said, "Well, I have some songs that I'd written when I was in college." And he said, "Oh yeah, you could play those." So I played that song, and I'm trying to remember. I played another song called "Gleam," which has some similar themes in it. But anyway, yeah. So it felt so good because I hadn't played it publicly in like 20 years, and it felt so good to sit there and with my friends, and there were a number of people who came from the church, and Katie was there, and Abby Clevenger, and some others, and it was just Maria and Peter Johnson, and so it was just a delight to be there with friends in that space and play that song again. And it still resonates with me, even though I'm in a different place in life, because you never, at least for me, you never arrive on the spiritual journey where you never experience struggles anymore, or doubts. It's like I think it's a human thing that is all throughout the journey. Those themes of feeling like at times like fog or disconnection or having trouble feeling God's closeness. Even Mother Teresa in her famous memoir, I think it's called "Be Thou My Light," from based on her journals, it was revealed that there were long periods where she went through life without feeling the closeness or the love of God. So that like even giants of the faith experienced it. So I think to express it in music is to help us be healthier in those times, to remind us that this is a natural human experience and we still seek after connection with God and faith through it and despite of it or beyond it or with it in the moment. So, yeah, so it still speaks to me today. I've tried writing songs recently, and I've done a few when I on my last sabbatical, I was really moved by a visit to the Peace Park in Hiroshima, and I was started writing a song about that, but I haven't ever performed that one. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting to like think about chances to now. I should probably pursue that more. You're right, Ken. Maybe I should try to talk with Tom and Jeremy and see if they would help me do a show here at the church. That would be fun. So,
Be great.
yeah, thanks. But how about for you guys? Barney, have you written anything or
Yeah.
Ken?
Well, I had a case where there was one hymn at church that we would sing every once in a while, and I was really drawn to it. And in the hymnal, it would usually say the original name of the hymn that it was based, translated into Japanese from. And even using resources like hymnary.org, I could never ever find the English version of the hymn. And then so I copied the hymn out of the hymnal, and I tape, put tape over the, or, put paper over the Japanese words. And then I just for, days and days and days, over a few weeks, just kind of when I'm relaxing, washing the dishes, whatnot, thought of maybe some English words that could go with the tune, and I'll share it. And again, it's funny because the tune is set to an old Scottish song, Scotch Air by Lady John Scott, Annie Laurie. And I kind of went from that, and I made it only 3 verses so that, young Barney would be happy. And I I thought that I like verse 3 because I thought, we don't really have any hymns about communion. And, verse 3 talks about, gathering round the table to join the wedding feast. And then in the refrain, I kind of alluded a little bit to Sermon on the Mount, talking about, sometimes they say, blessed are the poor in spirit. Sometimes they would say, blessed are the paupers. And then of course the meek, blessed are the meek. And so I used the words, meek and paupers in the refrain. And then as kind of a nod to the Scottish background of, connection with the tune, then instead of, I wrote, all who hunger and who thirst, and then all ye, I used ye instead of, you. Kind of a nod to the Scottish background of the tune. But I really liked the way that it came together, and I I thought it would be really nice, one day to be able to share it with people on to hear other people sing it. And we did sing it a few, maybe for a month, kind of at Yacho. We used to have a month where we usually had a time where we would sing one English hymn that I would teach everyone and do that for 4 weeks. And then one time this got to be the one that we chose. And yeah, I used the masculine he to refer to God, but I thought at the beginning the first line is, "Oh, the Lord is strong and faithful." I thought that kind of acknowledged, both our thoughts of the strength, but also the soft side of God, kind of giving both kind of attribute, a wider attribute to the notion of God in that. And so I thought when I finally had hummed the tune to myself and thought of lyrics to go with it enough, then I wrote it down and typed it up. And I thought, wow, this is one of my bucket list things to be able to say that I'd written lyrics to a hymn. And so I thought I could check that one off. So I was glad to be able to have done that.
Wow. I recall in my previous Lutheran church, we had an organist named John Burke, who's also the county treasurer, who's also a person that creates and sews Native American costumes and goes out and does shows for Native Americans based in Ohio. He took, as you probably know, the Lutheran service is full of liturgy and responses, and it can become feeling very rote week after week after week after week. So he took one of the liturgical settings and put all Beatles melodies to it, which really gave us something to look forward to when you'd open the bulletin and say, "Oh, great! This week's the Beatles liturgy," especially for us of a certain age who knew all of those songs. So kudos to John. They still use it. I know that here and there. He has since left that congregation, but I was impressed, as I am by you gentlemen, talking about your involvement with music, lyrics, writing melodies. Well done.
Thank you so much. I'm kind of wondering if, as we're drawing towards the end of our episode, if there's any moment in worship where a song created a special memory for you or an experience that you've never forgotten, some specific thing that happened or that you went away with that sticks with you. And so maybe if there is one, or we've mentioned a few actually already throughout the episode, like I'd mentioned, like at the ordination, my ordination, singing that one song, Faithful One, and thinking of my parents. But are there ones that you would like to mention? And if so, let's take a few minutes to share about that.
Sure, I'll go quickly here. I've told this story a number of times, and it's no less important or meaningful in my life. During a Good Friday service in the Lutheran church, I was up running the soundboard, and a young woman named Heather stood up to sing a solo that evening on Good Friday called Via Dolorosa. And it was, if you have not heard it, I utilized a Jacob in the service for Good Friday this past spring, and Jana did a wonderful job of rendering it. It is so emotional about Christ walking the road to Calvary that midway through she began to weep. Heather did, and I was so impacted by it. And afterward, I went up to her and she's apologizing, saying, "I'm so sorry." I said, "Heather, there's a moment right there that I will remember the rest of my
Mm.
life, how
Yeah.
moved you were with those words and heartfelt." Oh,
Mm,
it gives me chills every time I tell the
mm.
story. That was just a moment. And of course, Silent Night in our church, Jacob never loses, never loses a thing. Hand in hand, they're forming a circle, sometimes hand in hand, sometimes not. Great moment. Barney,
Yeah, I really like what you say about the end of the Christmas Eve service and them
Yeah.
singing Silent Night
Yes.
with the the
100%.
candles lit and the lights down. There really is just something so amazing about that, and so memorable year by year. And then I think and then it's something that would do every year, but it's something to look forward to. And then it's just something that, like, those great memories, that scene and the calm and the peacefulness that creates is just so wonderful. And then, of course, like, about this question in general, I remember the service for my mom's funeral was the singing was so wonderful. I actually got my phone out and turned on the recorder and recorded all of the hymns, and we'll definitely keep that, because it just was something. The choice of hymns, but of course, everyone's voice together singing just was so fantastic.
Yeah, that was a wonderful service. Glad to admit.
It was a very, very special service. What an honor to be there and a part of that, for sure.
Special lady.
Yes. When I was in middle school, our youth group would go to conferences pretty much every year. Sometimes it was every other year, but mostly it was yearly. And for a while, there was this youth conference called Acquire the Fire, which was like a high energy type of experience. But they at times would kind of dim the lights and actually give more of a meditative space for prayer and singing. And I remember going up to the front near the stage where the event was happening with some of my friends from youth group, Mark Lawson and Jason Pinnell, and then this international student who happened to be visiting that year from Japan, Taru Tezuka. And we were singing up front. They had kind of quiet music, and I just remember Taru like, really being impacted in that moment by what we were singing, and we all put our arms around each other, and we kinda stood there, like, singing, and it was just a real sense of friendship and closeness, but also a sense of worship. And it was not long after that conference that when we came back, Taru decided he wanted to commit his life to the Lord and to get baptized. And this is a picture from his baptism. We had it at my friend Mark Lawson's house. Part of his face is hard to see. He's wearing a black jacket. He's standing up, and I'm right beside him. I don't know if you recognize me with the teal and the red and the navy blue, but there at the bottom of the photo is Taru, and he got baptized right there in that hot tub, and that's our pastor at the time, John Raz. And it was just so special that that moment was really his conversion experience. Like,
Wow.
that's when he went forward. It was singing. We had our arms around each other. Then he accepted the Lord at that conference, at that moment, during that singing and that time, he accepted the Lord. And then when he came back, we got to see the culmination of that decision and this outward confession through his baptism that he wanted to be a follower of Jesus. And
Mm.
so it was a life-changing moment for him, but just witnessing that and being there with him made it a moment that stays with me. So
I love the hot tub idea there. Yeah, often wonder, maybe when we get to heaven,
Yeah.
we ask these questions, Lord, what'd you think about the hot tub? Yeah, it works. It
Uh,
wasn't about the hot tub.
yeah, yeah, right. Um, well, is there anything else that either of you would like to share before we close our episode?
Good here.
Okay. Well, we want to thank each of our listeners and viewers for spending this time with us as we shared our own experiences with music and worship. We hope that you too have had some opportunities in your life to experience meaningful music that has impacted you, that stays with you. And hopefully that music has a deeper sense of resonance and meaning, maybe even in your connection with God or a larger purpose in life. And so we're so grateful that you could join us as we shared about that. And we hope that this conversation can continue to stimulate your own thinking about your own journey. And once again, thank you, Barney. Thank you, Ken. And until next time, goodbye.